I got into trouble last summer with those U.S. newspaper hearings when I told the Congress that half of the 1,400 daily newspapers in the U.S. will be out of business by the end of this coming decade. Hopefully not my family paper, but we don't know. But I thought I was going out on a limb here and predicting this dire a problem over the next 10 years. In fact, the dean of my school said, "Do you really want to be quoted as saying that? You know, particularly since we receive endowments from some of these companies." And I felt a little better when 6 months later somebody asked the chairman and publisher of the New York Times to comment on it, and he said I was wrong. He said it'll be in 5 years. So these are how this issue of gravitation and surplus of information is reshaping the oldest of the information industries, newspapers. And it's tragic to a degree. The Bureau of Labor Statistics in my country says that in 2008, 40,000 U.S. reporters were put out of work. A country of 310 million people, but 40,000 and 60,000 last year. 100,000 journalists were unemployed last year because of these failures of media companies, which is kind of odd because we have record enrollment in the newspaper department in my university, in most universities. There seems to be no correlation between the students coming in and actually the job market to a degree. But think of this, because if the average reporter, and I don't know how hard you work the reporters here at SBH, were to do arguably 8 stories a month, which is a pretty easy workload. They probably do a lot more than that. But just 8. That means that in my country, 800,000 stories a month aren't being reported. Almost 10 million stories aren't being reported that would have been reported 2 years ago. And some of those stories, you can bet, are scandals, you know, pollution, tragedies. It's a tragedy for my country and other countries that this is going on. And again, I'm saying this is happening in Germany, France, the UK, Canada, Australia, these problems, because we haven't come up with a good business model to make the difference here. By the way, there's a slide I don't have here, which I probably should have put in, which is that, somebody tell me what the circulation cost for a year's subscription to the Straits Times is? How much does a subscription home delivery cost? About 300? Okay. Actually, let me give you the figures for the New York Times on this. New York Times, to subscribe to it 7 days a week, is $868 US per year. And that newspaper actually 2 years ago earned $1 billion in advertising with 1 million subscribers, which basically means, if you do the math quickly, before I move on here, that every print subscriber to that newspaper brings that newspaper in direct income, $868 a year, plus roughly $1,000 a year indirectly in advertising revenue. Yet online, the New York Times makes about $30 per year per user. So they may have 17 million users, but at $30 a year, because they're not charging for anything online, and they don't have big advertising revenue, versus $1,800 a year, it basically means that for every print subscriber they use, they have to find 50 online users to make up the difference. And those numbers, by the way, don't work, even in a country as populous as mine. So there's a problem here. And in many countries, not here in Singapore, thankfully, but we may be entering not a dark age, but certainly a gray age for the next several years as we try and work out these problems of how to make money as people are starting to move and gravitate to different media. Some of these other things, because I'm running a little slow here in time. Transitional effects. What's the value of content? Because certainly it's very hard to charge people online what you could charge them in print. In print, if they want it in that format, you could probably charge them $1 a day, but they're not going to pay that same amount if they have access to every newspaper in the world. The objective value isn't there. Plus, if you put it online and have access to all this other information, and this actually, by the way, is the local paper in the town where I teach, in Syracuse, New York, and it does international, national, and regional and local news, but you can bet on their website nobody is going to their website for international news. Not when they have access to the New York Times, BBC, all these other ones. So online, everything becomes unpackaged, and what's valuable to it is just its local core attribute, in this case local news. So this is another problem with charging for the things. When you put it online, people are only going to use it for its core competency, which may be much less than traditionally it was packaged as. So if you start charging for content, will people pay when they have so much other access to information? Probably not. Control shifts also. It used to be the publishers and broadcasters decided when the content went out. How it was packaged. Well, if you want this, you also have to pay for that. But that's changed in terms of, shared control. Consumers don't have total control, but they certainly share it to a degree with people. We're having to provide information on demand nowadays to multiple devices. When people want it. It's changed a large part of our business. They demand it in multimedia. They demand it in multiple packages. And, of course, their attention span shrinks to a degree. When you only had a few choices, you'd spend time looking at them. But when you have thousands, millions of choices, you're quickly going through that remote control or not spending much time on a web page that doesn't interest you. The definitional effects. I'll do this quickly. What is a story? Nowadays, if somebody crash lands a plane in the Hudson River, or you hear an explosion, people want to know what's going on, even if the reporters don't totally know what the story is. In the old day, you'd wait, get the whole story, publish it in that morning's paper, or in the newscast at whatever time, 6 o'clock or noon or whatever. People want the information now, and they may want it in piecemeal form, where it's not together. It's not all there. What's local? What's community? Consumer-generated content. People are starting to refine what is local. To a publisher and a broadcaster, local was the city, the postal code, the political district. But many people now want information that's much more local than what traditionally we have given them. It might be their neighborhood plus the neighborhood they work in and maybe the commute in between. Discontiguous or hyper-local. They have more control. They'll go someplace else if they can't get it from you. If somebody gives them this, they'll be more interested in it. It changes the definitions of what is local. Also, what's community? Community used to be based on physical locations, but now I'm sure many of you have people you communicate with online where it's based on a shared interest or hobby or group, or people you've maybe even never met. Actually, I have several people I'm hoping to meet later today, some of whom might be in the audience here, I have been communicating with for years professionally who I've never met. But they're friends of mine, because we're on various interest groups and professional forums. So it can be based on interests, something of that sort, or virtual locations to a large degree. The definition of community has certainly changed. Consumer-generated content. These terms Web 1 and Web 2. One of the major changes that have gone on is that if you look at these, they're basically geology. That's another subject I wasn't very good in school at. But they're historic periods. It used to be up from 1991, 92 till 2001. It was very hard to put information online. You needed technical training, you needed IT people, you needed expensive software. But eventually the costs of that software, cost of that technology reduced to the point where it was no longer large organizations like media companies or governments or universities putting in things online, but soon anybody could start putting information online. The result is things like YouTube, MySpace, Twitter. Anybody can become a publisher or a broadcaster to a large degree. And that's certainly changed the fabric of our media industries. Media itself. People are becoming contributors to content. How do we use this? How do we operate it? There's a number of people I was talking with yesterday at SPH who said, well, some of this is quite good. Some of these people don't really know what they're doing. Some of them are not objective. It's true, but we have to find ways to make them part of it because they're contributing information. Much as I mentioned, the Iranian Revolution revolts or earthquakes in China. Some of it's quite good content, and we have to figure out how to do it. Millions of blogs and social networks. Good enough beats perfect. How many of you have ever gone to YouTube because you want to know how to sharpen a knife or to carve a goose or something of this sort? You'd think that with all the information out there that people would be competing on the basis of quality, but often what we're finding is that if the content's just good enough, people will use it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Otherwise, how do you explain YouTube with 100 million videos on it? It's changed how we do things.